are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all to distill from them lessons that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices. So this is a way for me to give back for the support that you, my fellow citizens, gave to the military, certainly when I was a part of it, but even as you continue to do so now that I'm no longer in the military, but many friends and colleagues are. So today's topic is run a business like a SEAL. And if you saw any of my social media posts, you saw something along the lines of not the animal, the Navy SEAL, right? I don't know. We want to run our businesses like a large but somewhat cute, creature barking and clapping its flippers, like we see, in SeaWorld or wherever. But so my last job in the Navy was as a chaplain for SEAL Team 17. That's one of the two reserve SEAL team units, or reserve component SEAL team units. But at the time, we were right across the street from the active duty SEAL facility. And I got to walk through it many times and see what went on there. And I took classes at that facility on special operations and such. It was quite fascinating. And one of the stories and I may have told this before on the show, but one of the stories I most cherished from that time was I was taking a class through what's called the Joint Special Operations University, JSOU. And most of the people in the class were part of a Green Beret team, and what's called an ODA. And then there were just two or three of us from the SEAL community. And on a break during the class, we were outside the classroom on a balcony overlooking where the SEALs were training. And they were running this exercise where there were two or three teams of SEALs, and they had a 50-pound barbell, and there was a chain slung through it. And then they had looped the other end of the chain and put a leather piece on it. And they would put that leather chain part over their shoulder, and they would drag that 50-pound barbell for whatever the distance was, 50 feet, take off the thing, hand it to the next guy. And it was a relay race going back, right? And so I was watching this evolution with some of the Green Berets, and one of them turns to me at one point, and he just says to me, he goes, "Sir, they're just animals." Right? And the Green Berets really fancy themselves the more sort of intellectual special operations people, whereas they look at the SEALs as being just brute force, right? When you absolutely have to destroy it, you send in the SEALs, kind of thing. So it was very funny, but there was like a little bit of truth to it. These SEALs were just, they were, especially compared to the Green Berets, they were just massively built, not necessarily tall, but just like so strong, and the muscles and bulging and all that kind of stuff. So you might get from this story that the SEALs are not an intellectual group, but indeed they are. And one of the things I learned in being in the SEAL community was the biggest and the strongest were not the ones that necessarily became SEALs. So the secret, if you will, to becoming a SEAL really dealt with the mental grit that these candidates could muster through what's called BUDS. So BUDS stands for Basic Underwater Demolition / SEALs. And I should mention that SEALs stands for Sea, Air, and Land. So the idea is these special operators can operate in all the elements in the ocean, in riverine territory, on land, and in the air. So they have an enormous amount of training and flexibility, and they are perhaps the mentally toughest people on the planet. So in thinking about this particular episode and what we can take away from BUDS, SEAL training in general, it was really from that perspective that I looked at or developed what I was going to say. So, and you can see it in my first point right off the bat. So, the reality of BUDS is mental toughness is a more important factor than physical strength. So mental resilience, one's mindset, is much more important than raw talent. So the BUDS trainees who succeed, they're usually not the biggest and the fastest. Okay, they're the ones who have the mental toughness that they just refuse to quit. They refuse to give up. And when we think about this in a business context, so business fundamentally is a mental endurance exercise. So if we're starting a business, running a business, it's going to be essentially a never-ending series of challenges. That's what business is. There's no such thing as a business that we kind of set up and it runs on autopilot, especially nowadays. Maybe 75 years ago, we could set up a manufacturing business and it would churn out its widgets, and we had our distribution chain set up in such a way that the widgets got manufactured, they got distributed to the retailers, and the retailers sold them, and it just kind of went on and on. And changes from year to year weren't that important. People kept buying them. Maybe you made out of toothpaste or whatever. But these days, it's a constant battle almost of looking at one's product lineup, looking at one's services, figuring out what do I need to do to better align with the market, better serve the market, operate more efficiently. What products or services do I need to drop? What new ones do I need to bring online? And that constant grind, and it really is a grind. There's no romance to that. That constant grind is a challenge to our mental capacity, far more so than our physical capacity, far more so. And so the mental toughness that trainees are required is kind of the wrong word, that trainees need to exhibit in order to successfully complete BUDS. If we had that same level of mental toughness, we would be much more successful in our businesses. And one of the things you'll note is there are a lot of SEALs that go into business, and they are formidable competitors because they are relentless. They have that mental grit, if you will, to keep working on whatever it is their goal is. They do not give up. Okay, so that's number one. Mental toughness is more important than physical strength. Okay, number two, we want to embrace the pain, basically. Embrace the pain. Now that sounds strange because our society is so pain averse, right? Comfort, pleasure, these are the hallmarks of our culture, right? People wear pajamas to go to the grocery store. I read an article, this is some months ago now, I think, where young people had to be told not to wear pajamas to work. I mean, honestly, when I was a young man starting out in the workplace and in business, it was just unthinkable. You wore a shirt and tie like I do now. In anything important, you wore a suit or at least, a collared shirt, a tie, and a sports coat and slacks. There was just no other way of comprehending it, right? And the fact that it was uncomfortable was completely immaterial because what mattered was presenting oneself in a proper way in order to have the best chance at getting the business. Now, honestly, last week I had a business meeting and time got away from me. I had worked out earlier in the day and I finally threw up my hands. Okay, and I shut up the meeting. I had a shirt with kind of a quarter zip, workout shirt over it. I mean, I didn't look sloppy and all that, but honestly, I didn't do it for comfort, but but nobody blinked an eye, even when I said, pardon me for being inappropriately dressed. And I think most of the people felt like, what do you mean? Everybody dresses that way these days, right? So we don't embrace the pain in society today, but in the SEALs culture, okay, they endure freezing water. I mean, the water off the coast of California. So the SEAL training facility is on Coronado Island, which is down in the San Diego area. In the wintertime, especially, that water is cold. It is really cold, right? They deal with sleep deprivation, just punishing physical demands. And they can either complain about them or they can embrace them. And what you see is when they're heading in the water, they're running that water like it's just going to be the greatest feeling in the world. And it's not. Okay, if you've ever run into freezing water, it's not. But part of the ethos of the SEAL community is the more awful a situation is, the more they want to embrace it. So they learn to operate at their best in the worst circumstances. And this builds true confidence, okay, that they can, look forward to diving into freezing water, knowing that they're still going to excel. That's confidence, right? So much of what we build confidence on in our society is illusory. Gold stars for having shown up. I mean, there's nothing, honestly, there's nothing um, laudatory about showing up. That's the minimum behavior to get anywhere in life, is showing up. Okay. So the fact that a lot of people these days, it seems like, can't even show up does not make showing up an achievement. Right. So, as we look at what it's necessary to be successful in the business world, we need to really, to use this sort, I'm not so fond of this term, but lean into, difficult conversations. We may need to really, embrace working long hours or taking big risks. Okay. So we can't wait for perfect conditions. We can't only do the things we like to do. Okay. What we can do is learn to love the things that we hate, in essence, about a business, right? And so I'll give you an example from my current business. Lot of chaos in my current business. There's always things happening, many of which they're just not in my control, and they've got to be dealt with, right? And there's a couple things I could do. I could do them myself, in which case I could be sure that they're going to get taken care of in the way I want them to be taken care of. Okay, and absolutely run myself into the ground. Okay, to the point where I would end up in the hospital, which is what happened about a year ago. Okay, and I realized, okay, can't that while that's my preferred way to handle things, can't handle it that way. Much better for me to learn to delegate and trust my colleagues to handle things well. Okay. And I've had to learn to embrace that and to really trust my colleagues and demonstrate that trust to them and stand behind that trust I'm giving them. Okay. Even when and on sometimes they're doing things differently than I would do, maybe not as good as I think I would have done them. That's not the issue. The issue is to embrace this difficult aspect of business so that my business will be sustainable, so that my clients will be served well, right? That's what's important. Okay, so I've got to embrace the pain, and oftentimes just learn to learn to keep my mouth shut is really what it comes down to, which you might imagine is difficult for me because you see me broadcasting at least 3 times a week, right? Talking for roughly 45 minutes to an hour each time. So we need to embrace the difficult aspects of our businesses, okay? Especially the ones that it's important get done, but we don't want to do. Okay, that's what SEAL training teaches SEALs. Okay, to embrace the pain. So that's number 2. Number 3, team first, ego last. Okay, so SEALs do not operate alone. They operate in a team. They're called SEAL teams, right? Like I was part of SEAL Team 17. Now, I was not an operator. I was what's called an enabler, which I always found that a funny term because enabler sounds somewhat salacious. And being a chaplain, didn't really want to be an enabler in that sense. But that's what I was. I was someone who helped the operators be able to accomplish what they needed to accomplish, right? That's an enabler. So in the SEAL world, there has to be a high level of trust among team members, okay? Because each one has the things that he needs to do, but he's also part of an interlocked group where if one thing goes wrong, it can have bad, even cataclysmic circumstances for the other members of the team. Okay. So whether it's in buds when they may be doing, your where your boat cruise performance really matters far more than individual excellence, right? Um, or whether it's the exercise where they're carrying a log, and each person's individual performance matters, but only as part of a team that's carrying that log on their shoulders. So much of buds and SEAL training in general is about building teamwork and mutual trust between team members. Okay? Those bonds have to be, for all intents and purposes, unbreakable. Okay, and for the Bud's trainee who lets his ego get ahead of him, thinking I've got to be the best, I got to stand out. that person is less likely to be successful in buds, because one of the things that the trainers are looking for is this individual in it just for himself, or is he in it to make the team successful? Okay, that's really an important factor that they're evaluated on. Okay, pardon me. So team first, ego last. And in business, many times that's what matters. Most of the time, maybe even all of the time. Business now, more so than ever before, is a team sport. Okay. So we as members of our group at our company, or as leaders of our business or professional practice, what we need to build is alignment between the different people involved, okay, so that everybody is making everybody else better. That's really the goal, okay? And as leaders, we need to be as comfortable leading and showing the way. I'm sorry, we need to be as comfortable making sure that the members of our team have what they need in order to succeed, as we are in leading the way. Okay. And it seems like some leaders are better at one or the other. So some are, they're very charismatic, and they can inspire and all of that. But when it comes to really looking after their team members, nah, they're not so good about that. They're much more ego driven. Others are very good at looking after their team members' wants and needs, or needs and wants, better way to put it. But when it comes to inspiring and really leading and showing the way, they're not nearly as successful. Both of those are critical leadership skills. Okay. And I've talked about this on other shows, this idea of the so-called servant leader. I find that to be an incomplete conception of what leadership needs to be. So leadership needs to actually lead. It needs to sometimes, in a polite way, give people a kick in the backside, or inspire or inspire them to move forward by showing what is possible if we work together. That's as important as also having the kind of rapport with the members of your team where they're comfortable letting you know what their needs are, why maybe their performance is subpar, and seeking and feeling comfortable seeking your help in getting better, improving, getting up to speed. Okay, so both the inspirational side of leadership and the helping side of leadership are part of putting the team first. Okay. So when I talk about being an inspirational leader, I don't mean from an ego standpoint. I mean from the standpoint of inspiring the team to work together for a goal. That's what's critical about being able to inspire people, not showing off, oh, how great am I? Look what I can say and make people or get people to do. Largely irrelevant. Okay. Once ego gets inserted into it, the effectiveness of the inspiration starts to deteriorate. Okay. And in fact, one of the worst SEALs I ever met was someone who was not successful. He was a sailor, he was in the Navy. He was not successful in advancing through the leadership hierarchy of the SEAL community. So he ended up making a lateral move into a different community in the reserves world. And he was a horrible leader, one of the worst leaders I ever encountered. And it was clear why the SEALs didn't want him, because he was just over the top in ego. Among the many egregious things he did, and this was related to me by several of junior sailors in his command was he would show up at the office with a backpack filled with rocks. And he would brag about how, even at his age, and he was, I think, at that point, he was in his probably late 40s or early 50s, he could run with a backpack of rocks on his back. Can you do that? That's not leadership. That's pure ego. That is not inspiring. That's putting people down. That's trying to convince them that, he was trying to convince us, see how great I am, but one couldn't escape the corollary, which is, I'm better than you. That's not leadership. And that's why the SEAL community didn't want him, because he was ego first, team last. And that's the opposite of what SEALs look to inculcate into their team members. And we need to do the same thing as people who lead businesses and practices. Okay. Team first, ego last. Okay. Next, this is point number 4. Okay. Small things matter. Okay. So in the SEAL community, and it's certainly in BUD/S, okay, they are inspected regularly. Everything from how they make their bed, arranging their gear, all of the attention to detail is absolutely non-negotiable. And it takes a very high level of discipline to maintain the vigilance that's necessary to make sure that all the details are attended to. Okay. I'm sure you've heard the expression, the devil is in the details. That is so true of BUD/S and SEAL activity in general. The big things are really just the combination of numerous small things, numerous details that, when brought together, have a large impact. That's what the SEALs are all about. Okay. So I mentioned that exercise where they're dragging that barbell back and forth. So, like, one of the details that was so crucial was the way they took that harness off and handed it over to the next SEAL in a way that made it easier for him to get it on. So they didn't just slough it off and kind of throw it to him. They took it off, they held the loop open, so and in a way where he could grasp it and put it on with the least amount of friction, the least amount of time. Right? You say, oh, come on. I mean, they're dragging a 50-pound weight. It's like, that's the attention to detail of that exercise. Okay. So in our businesses, more so than huge initiatives, which sometimes we'll launch, of course, but those initiatives will be successful because of all the tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of details that were properly handled. So, small improvements in processes, consistent communication, honoring every commitment, no matter how small. Okay. All of these build excellence in our businesses. So, honoring commitments. Now, by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to end up being on time. What it does mean is, if we find ourselves falling behind, we may need to seek out help. We may need to get to our other team members and say, hey, I'm falling behind. I'm not going to get this done on time. Can you help me out? How can we readjust the schedule so that this all still happens, right? All of those details, the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, those are what really matter. Okay. And if we're able to master the detail, perform them with excellence, then we have a much greater chance at creating a successful business. Right? I've said this a number of times. I don't know if it's so much on this show, maybe more on my show, People Making Money. Great ideas for a business, they're pretty much a dime a dozen. There's lots of people who can come up with a great idea. The people who are successful are the ones who can take that idea, create a plan, break that plan down into the individual steps that need to be taken in order to have a shot at bringing the plan to fruition. And those plans are made up of details. Okay. And if the details can be done well, then maybe the business is going to be successful. But that's far more important than having the big idea where there's never a plan and we never get down to the details of executing the plan. Okay. So small things matter. Okay, I'm going to take just a moment here for a sponsor break. So today's show is sponsored by the Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. So the Navy League of the United States is a civilian organization designed to create interaction and communication between civilians and people in the military to support the sea services, which are the United States Marine Corps, the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard, and the United States Merchant Marine. And their mission is threefold: to support, educate, and advocate for the sea services in terms of their part in our national defense, in sustaining international commerce, and overall protecting our country. So if you are interested in more information on the Navy League of the United States, you can go to navyleague.org. And I'm the president of Beverly Hills Council. We would love it if you would join. And if you're in the greater Los Angeles area, designate the Beverly Hills Council as your home council. One more word: on Thursday of this week, May 22nd, 2025, we're having a meet and greet at Fleet Week down in San Pedro, California at 5 p.m. So if you're interested or you're going to be down at Fleet Week, please do keep an eye out for us and stop by and say hello. Would love to shake your hand. So that's Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Okay, so going back to our topic now, we're talking about what we can learn from Navy SEALs BUDS training that we can apply to our business. So I mentioned already, mental toughness is more important than physical strength. We should embrace the pain. Team first, ego last, and small things matter. Now, next, you're always being evaluated. Okay. So the fact of the matter is, oftentimes BUDS trainees are being evaluated even when they're not necessarily aware of it. The instructors are there watching how they perform under pressure, how they treat their teammates, how they respond to setbacks. All of that is being evaluated. Okay. And even when the candidates or the trainees think they're not being watched, someone is watching. So to speak from a religious standpoint for a minute, I always find it interesting when people sort of take this attitude that, oh, I was alone, nobody was watching. Well, if you live a God-centered life, God is always watching. Okay, so we are never alone. We are never not under scrutiny. Okay, and going back to the BUDS context, so BUDS trainees are always under scrutiny. So in the business world, what we do and how we behave when our colleagues are not around is just as important as what we do when they are around, because how we speak, how we act reflects on us and our part in the business. Okay. So we would be wise to remember we're always being evaluated. Okay. Now, you may say, oh, that's exhausting. How can I always be under such pressure? Well, we need to build up our resilience. Okay. That's part of building grit, building toughness. Okay, is realizing that we're always being evaluated. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, we can look at how we performed that day. We can take some pride in what we did well. We can make some plans on how to do better for the things that we didn't do well. And then we can lay our heads down on our pillow and go to sleep knowing that we did our best. We've evaluated our performance. And now we're going to get up tomorrow and face another day and redouble our efforts to perform better than the day before. That's really what it comes down to. Okay, next. Adaptability is survival. So, one of the hallmarks of buds is that you have a plan, but something's going to go wrong. And so you've got to be able to pivot. And the trainers hammer in the concept of adaptability, the and the ability to stay calm and mission focused, even as it's crucial that plans be altered in order to get to the objective. Okay. And this is the key thing. If you're in a hostile environment and all of a sudden the plan is like, poof, it's not going to work, right? You cannot panic. You cannot get upset. You have to coolly and calmly evaluate the circumstances quickly and make a decision about how you're going to adapt to the new circumstances. Okay. The same is true in business, right? I was talking at the beginning about how you can't set a business on autopilot anymore, if you ever could. But today, the pace, the rapidity of change in business is so great. We have to be adaptable always. It needs to just be part of who we are. Okay. And so the business leaders who can be adaptable, or who are adaptable, okay, they will outlast the ones who rigidly stick to their plan. Oh, it's a good plan, and if I just stick with it, it's going to work out. Not in today's environment. Okay, you have to have a plan, and there are good reasons to have a plan so you can step off confidently. But as circumstances change, you need to be ready to improvise, adapt away from the plan, but that decision needs to be made coolly and calmly, not in a panic. Okay? So adaptability is survival. Okay, next. Voluntary suffering builds confidence. So this is somewhat related to embrace the pain. But in this case, in the case of embrace the pain is largely being inflicted outside of one's own desires. Voluntary suffering means actually take on doing difficult things. Do hard things on purpose. Look for challenges. Okay. So the culminating event in Buds is something called Hell Week, and it lasts for 5.5 days, and it is designed to push the trainees to their absolute limits. Okay, so when they come out the other side, they know they have truly walked through hell in that sense. Okay, so during Hell Week, okay, they get perhaps 4 hours of sleep in total, not 4 hours a day, but 4 hours, maybe 4 hours of sleep during the whole 5.5 days. They're soaking wet from being in the ocean. They're cold. They're exhausted. They're probably hungry. They are pushed to the edge. And it's not about physical strength. It's about mustering the grit, the mental toughness to get through. Okay. We need to do the same thing in our lives and especially in our businesses, right? We need to take on tough challenges. Now, one of the places we can do this most easily is in our personal lives where we commit to physical exercise that's tough, right? So recently I decided to start doing I used to do push-ups every day when I was in the Navy to make sure I was always ready for the physical readiness test, the PRT. And for some reason I stopped doing it. So now I do a set of three I do 3 sets of push-ups 4 or 5 times a week. And each week I add one more push-up to it, and I'm going to keep building up, and hopefully I'm going to get to the point where I can do 100 push-ups again. Okay. I can't do that right now. Okay. But I know I used to be able to do easily like 70 or 80 push-ups, whatever the max score was for someone my age. I was able to knock that out in a minute. Right now, because I haven't been training and haven't wanted to do hard things, frankly, I stopped doing it. So now I'm re-embracing doing this hard thing. I'm going to build up over the next, whatever, 50 weeks to be able to do 75, 80 push-ups and just knock them out, a minute, minute and a half, whatever it is to be able to do them. Okay. Because we all need to, I need to continue to do things to build my mental toughness. And like I said, to just do push-ups or pull-ups, right? You can just get right down on the deck and crank out the push-ups. It doesn't take that long, right? But it will help build that mental toughness. So then that mental toughness is available to us in our businesses. Okay. And in our businesses, we want to take on tough challenges, right? So for a good 9 months, I did an every weekday evolution of reaching out to 20 prospective clients or really prospective sources of business, contacting them, following up with them, right? And to build up my contacts. Okay. And now it's hard for me personally, it's hard to do that because I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. And so having to reach out to people all the time, very, very difficult. Now I'm working on the next level of that, which is to reach out to the contacts I've made on a regular basis by phone, which is even more difficult for me. Okay. But I need to do hard things on purpose, and we all need to find those in our business in order to make ourselves more effective. We need to have our own little mini hell week, in order to build ourselves up. Okay, next. 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So redundancy and preparation prevent disaster. Okay, so one of the principles of the SEAL community is emphasizing backup plans and gear. Okay, so there's essentially a presumption that gear is going to break, plans are going to go awry, and so there has to be backup plans and backup gear readily available so that the mission so that the mission can continue and the objective be achieved. Okay, so in our businesses, we need to be looking for the failure points. Maybe they're in our supply chain, maybe it's cash flow, maybe it's leadership succession, and we need to be actively working to prepare redundancies in those areas to prevent catastrophe. Okay, so this philosophy of 2 is 1 and 1 is none, I love that phrasing because when you think about it, if you've got a weak point in your business and it fails, now you essentially do not have a business. Okay, you're out of business until you can get that fixed. Okay. But if there are redundancies built into the weak points, so okay, it fails, but you can immediately get the generator going, powers back on, and the business continues. Maybe it doesn't continue in the most ideal circumstances, but it does continue. Okay. So that's what we mean by two is one, because when we have a potential failure point, we have to be anticipating it is going to fail at some point. So if there's no backup, one becomes none. But if there's two and the primary one fails, it's fine. We still have the other one to take over. So two is one is none. We need to critically evaluate our businesses. Where are our vulnerabilities? Where are our likely failure points? And then build in those redundancies. Okay, next. Control what you can control. Okay, so there are really only a couple of things that we can absolutely control in our lives. One is what we say, and the other is what we do. Okay, we can keep our mouths shut, and we can refrain from actions, or we can open our mouths and say something, and we can take action. Okay, and we can control that. Okay, there's no such thing as I just had to say this. You actually know you didn't. You did not. That's a cop out to say you had to say something, especially if what you say is counterproductive, okay, unduly harsh or critical. No, you don't have to say those things. Okay. I have an ongoing conversation with a friend of mine who loves to troll. He says, I just have to troll. It's like, actually, no, you don't. I mean, I know you do troll and you like trolling, and sometimes what you say is humorous. But let's be honest, you don't have to. It is a choice that you're making. Okay. Now, some people say, oh, I can control my mindset. I don't believe that. You can control it to a certain degree. Okay. But nobody has absolute control over their mindset. Nobody has absolute control over their thoughts, right? Don't think about an elephant. And what are you thinking about right now? An elephant. Okay. I mean, we don't have absolute control over our minds. Okay. And that's fine. Okay. Let's recognize what we can control. We can control what we say and we can control what we do. Okay. From a bud's perspective, they can't control the surf. They can't control the temperature of the water. They can't control that the instructor is yelling at them. They can't control what their team members are doing. What they can control is their own performance and what they say as individuals. That's what they control. Okay? And that's why it's so important to gain ever greater control over what they say and do, so that it goes back to team first, ego last. Okay? The incentive to exercising control over what they can control, speech and action, is that is what will make them an ever better teammate. Okay? So in business, okay, we can't control changes in the marketplace. We cannot control our customers' moods, the outlook of our investors. We can't control our competitors. What we can control is the message that our business gives and the actions that we and our teammates take. Now, we as business leaders, we can't control what our teammates do, but we can create an ethic inside our businesses that each individual team member wants to work to have ever greater control over his actions, so that we're all focused on the same, achieving the mission, all focused on achieving the same objective. Okay. So control what you can control and focus on that. and use that control to respond to all the myriads of other circumstances that you face over which you have no control. Okay? Control what you can control. Finally, quitting is a habit. Now this is a more subtle one, I think, than some of the other ones we've been talking about. So in the SEAL community, particularly in buds, okay, if a trainee just absolutely gets to the point where he decides he's not going to successfully complete the training, he does what's called, he rings the bell. Okay, he literally, and you see the bell in the SEAL compound. Okay, it's a brass bell on a post basically, and he walks up to it and he rings the bell 3 times. Ding, ding, ding. And that means I'm done. I'm stepping out. He goes and he packs up his gear and he checks out and he goes on with his life. Okay. Now, part of that ethos is there's no shame in doing that. Okay. It's understood that a significant number of buds trainees are going to end up ringing the bell. That is the point of buds training, is to weed out the people who just don't have the mental toughness to get through. Okay, but here's the subtle point. The people who ring the bell at buds, they have been taken, they've absolutely been taken beyond where they can endure. They have, in many cases, endured challenges that they didn't think they could have endured before buds. And yet they realized there are even greater challenges ahead, and I am not going to be able to meet those challenges. Okay? Some candidates come back and they're able to successfully complete buds going through it another time. Okay? This is the ethos that we need to create in our businesses. Okay? We don't want people quitting just because things got a little bit difficult, or they're a little bit tougher than they thought. That kind of quitting becomes a habit. Okay? If we're going to quit, we need to quit because we've gone beyond our level of endurance and yet have realized the challenges ahead are even greater than what we've met so far. That's where we decide to quit. Okay. Now, I remember when I was studying to get my rabbinical ordination, and every day I was studying the material, and it was essentially like a year and a half in law school, only the material was in Aramaic. Okay, Aramaic is essentially a dead language. It was spoken in ancient Babylonia. And it was just there were days when I was going over and over and over a concept, and it just seemed like I couldn't get it. And I finally went and spoke to somebody at my synagogue who I thought could help me out with this. And I explained to him the situation. And I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this. And he said, "Well, are you so sure that it's unendurable?" I'm like, "Well," and he said, "Well, obviously not, because you just said, well. And he says, "What else is coming down the pike that's even more unendurable than this?" I said, "Well, I mean, probably not anything." And he said, "Well, so If you get over this, it looks like you're over the hump and you're good to go. Not these are not, exact words, but basically conveying what he said, right? Quitting when you haven't been tried to the kind of last ounce of your ability, your endurance, that becomes a habit. Same in business. So we need to push and push beyond. And having pushed beyond, we need to reasonably conclude that the challenges ahead are even greater and they keep growing and growing. Okay, at that point, maybe we need to quit. We need to ring the bell. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. But prior to that, no, we keep going. Okay. We don't ring the bell. And I think one of the reasons the bell stands so prominently in the SEAL compound is to remind the Buds trainees there is an easy way out. You can just go up and ring the bell. No shame, right? But you have to take the responsibility of quitting. Okay? And they see that all day long during the training. It's an incentive for them to build their grit, build their resilience. Okay? And we need to do that in our businesses as well. So, especially for our team members who have decided to take on hard things on purpose, those are the ones who will most embrace the concept that quitting is a habit and avoid doing so. Okay? So we want to reinforce that to them. Okay? So that's how you run a business like a SEAL, okay, or like a SEAL team. So I encourage you to think about these and see how you can apply them to your business, how you can apply them to your life. Right? I was fortunate that I got to, be in this SEAL community, be in the Gestalt as we call it, and I don't want to say I absorbed them by osmosis because I don't think that's the case, but I got to talk to them. One of my commanding officers was a captain in the SEAL community who this was in the reserves. He was also a pilot for a private jet service. We talked a lot, and I learned a tremendous amount from him about resilience, about grit, and it's been invaluable in my life. And so hopefully I've been able to convey at least a little bit of that to you for you to apply to your businesses in your life. So uh, that's the show for today. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. We're going to do our monthly economic echoes where we break down the economic data from the previous month and look at how we can use that to make better financial decisions for us and our families, okay, our loved ones. So that's People Making Money, 10 a.m. Wednesday. And then Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place. And we're going to sit back and have a cocktail, the Twain, and that's in honor of our subject, which is the great American author Mark Twain, who wrote Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Innocents Abroad, Pudd'nhead Wilson, so many outstanding books. And if you've watched Jiggers' Place before, you know I am a tremendous aficionado of 19th century literature. Mark Twain is the way to get involved with it. So please join me on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time at Jiggers' Place. We'll have a cocktail and a schmooze, as we say. And then next week on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm sorry. I made this mistake yesterday as well. So actually, next Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time will be a special edition of the Way to Wow shows for Memorial Day. So I hope you will join me for that. We'll take around 45 minutes to an hour, like a normal show, and talk about why Memorial Day is meaningful. And then a week from today, we'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So thank you very much for joining me. Always great to see my my live viewers. Thanks so much. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my best.